Language is one of the most amazing things you can learn. How do babies learn language? Well, it turns out that babies are ready to go when it comes to picking up language. What do I mean by that? Well, a brand new baby, a newborn baby, is ready to direct its attention to the voice of its mother over the voices of other women. So you are learning in the womb what your mother's voice sounded like, because the moment you're born, you're more likely to pay attention to your mother's voice than to the voices of other women. Isn't that amazing? So a fetus is listening to you. Even preterm babies will show a reduced heart rate, so a calming when they hear their mother's voices. Now, here's where it gets really amazing. Babies know their parents' language. What? Great study done in France with 4-day-old babies. 4-day-old babies. Now, these babies heard French while they were in the womb. And when they had a choice between having a book read to them in French or in English, the babies pick French. Babies pick, they want to hear the language that they heard while they were in the womb. Amazing, right? Wait, it gets even more wild. I got to tell you about this cat in the hat study. It's just amazing. Pregnant women read the book, The Cat in the Hat, it's a Dr. Seuss book, read the book, The Cat in the Hat, twice a day during the last 4 months of their pregnancy. Okay? Here's the experimental setup. After the babies are born, a baby can't tell you, a newborn baby can't tell you, oh yeah, that's what I hear. So you have to come up with these fancy ways to figure out what a baby can differentiate from something else. So in this study, they gave the babies an artificial nipple. And if the babies sucked on the nipple, then they could hear the story that they heard in the womb. If they didn't suck on the nipple, then they heard a different story. Okay? Babies who were read The Cat in the Hat for the last 4 months of their prenatal development will suck on an artificial nipple in order to hear somebody read that story again. Yes. So it's not just mom's voice or the family languages, it's also the specific stories. Now, The Cat in the Hat has a very melodic structure, so that probably has something to do with it, but it's still an amazing phenomenon. Let me go back once again to this concept in developmental psychology that we get better at things and we get worse at things. When you were young, and by that I mean hearing babies when they up to about 10 months of age, you are able to produce all the sounds in all the languages in the world. Now, if you've ever tried to learn a second language or a third language as an adult, you know that it's really hard to pronounce some sounds. So I learned more or less French as an adult, and getting their R sound, it was a nightmare. I was terrible at it unless I had a head cold for some reason. But anyway, but a baby would have no trouble. Babies can make all the sounds in all the languages in the world, and they can detect, they can hear or see all the sounds or signs in all the languages in the world. But by the time they get to be 1 year old, they lose it. 1-year-olds make and can detect the sounds in the languages that are spoken around them, and they lose everything else. So if you want to raise your child as a bilingual, make sure to expose them to both languages even before they're 1 year old. Do it from the very beginning. Heck, talk to them in both languages when you're pregnant with them. Have you ever watched adults around a baby? They act like idiots, right? I do. Oh, it's a cute baby. Who's the cutest baby? Baby talk. Why do adults do baby talk? Well, because babies love it. And how do we know they love it? We just kind of figure it out, right? But baby talk is a sort of exaggerated language that adults use when they're talking to babies because babies respond to it. Now, babies do something called babbling. And it doesn't matter if they're hearing babies or deaf babies. Both types of babies babble. And what do I mean by babbling? Well, somewhere between 6 and 7 months of age, and babies start to produce the sounds in their mother tongues, the languages that they've been exposed to, and they'll do it spontaneously. It's like they're trying to figure out how to make the sounds or how to produce their signs. So deaf babies babble with hands. Hearing babies babble with their mouths. By the time, I forgot to say, and the babbling at the beginning, when you're 6, 7 months, again, it's all the sounds of all the languages in all the worlds. Just amazing, right? But then after you get about to 1 year of age, the babbling occurs only for the sounds or the signs that the baby's growing up around. Okay, language learning. By the time a child is about 2 years old, they know about 300 words. By the time they're 3 years old, we're up to 900 words. 4 years old, we're up to 1,500 words. So those are big increases. But look at what happens between the ages of 5 and 6 years of age. There's this explosion of vocabulary, right? These kids learn 10,000 words in 1 year. Crazy, right? That isn't. When you were that age, 5, 6 years old, you were learning almost 30 new words every day. Isn't that crazy? Could you imagine being able to learn 30 new words every day now that you're an adult? I mean, that language section on the SAT exams would have been a cakewalk, right? But it turns out that there is huge variability in vocabulary size across different children. And that vocabulary size diversity has some big consequences. So I'm going to show you here. This is a graph that was published back in 1995 by some researchers who counted the number of words that were spoken. So this original study was only done with hearing children. They counted the number of words that hearing children heard during their first 4 years of life. Kind of amazing. And what they found is that by the time a baby was 4 years old, so 48 months, there was a 30 million word gap. And by that I mean some children had been exposed to 30 million more words than other children. And when this work started, folks really focused in on the socio-economic status of the family. So it turns out that in this 95 study, the children who were born into professional families, their parents, their family members, their caregivers are talking to them a lot more than children who were born into low-income families. And you can say, okay, so some children are exposed to a lot more words than others. And by a lot, I mean over 3 times more words than others. Who cares? I mean, maybe that doesn't matter. Well, it turns out that correlates or matches closely with vocabulary size in children. So if you look at the vocabulary sizes of 3-year-old kids, the variation's sort of big. So the children born into professional families by the age of 3 know over 1,000 words. The children who were born into working class families know about 750 words, and the children born into families on social assistance know about 500 words. So that vocabulary size difference is big. And if you think about what these kids are going to experience in school, once they get there, a child with a vocabulary of 1,000 words is going to have a very different school experience than a child who has a vocabulary of 500 words. Other researchers continued on this series of studies and found out that the IQ, and you know how I feel about IQ tests, but the intelligence of children at the age of 3 is strongly correlated with the number of words spoken to them in the first 3 years of life. So the children who experience low levels of daily talk, so children raised in families where the kids and parents don't talk very much, those children had a lower IQ. So honestly, in my family, the theory was that kids were to be seen and not heard, so there wasn't a ton of interaction, of talking between children and their parents. So yeah, that would have been me. On the other end of it, though, the children who were exposed to lots and lots of talking, where people are engaging with them all the time, those kids already had a much higher IQ. Their IQ was already 118. And this effect is independent of the socioeconomic status of the family. It's not about how wealthy a kid is, it's about the language environment in which they grew up. Kids who grow up in a rich language environment seem to be more intelligent than children who grow up in an environment, a family environment, that is language poor. Because this has such a profound potential, researchers have been following up on this phenomenon for a very long time. Because think about it. If a child comes into schooling with a much smaller vocabulary than the other children in the class, they're starting out behind, and sometimes way behind, even before school starts. No one wants to do that to a child. In 2018, researchers at MIT went back and analyzed old data and collected new data, and they found out that what is really important is not your socioeconomic status, it's not the number of words that a child hears. It's something correlated with that. It is the number of times the child interacts, does turn-taking with an adult. So the kind of conversation that you want to have with your child is the kind where you go back and forth with each other, where you're having a conversation. If your conversation with your child is eat your peas, go to bed, it's not a back and forth. What's really important for vocabulary size is the back and forth. Okay, come back and we'll talk about your development of thought.